I knew the whole neighborhood was about to freeze solid 3 hours before anyone else did. Not because I had some secret connection at the weather station, but because I'd spent almost 20 years studying winter storms the hard way, first in the military, then behind the wheel of a commercial snowplow. The funny part is, by the time the homeowners association started begging me for help on Christmas Eve, my truck wasn't sitting in my driveway anymore. They had it towed. And the woman responsible looked me straight in the eye the day before and said, "People who buy homes in communities like ours shouldn't have to look at industrial equipment every morning." My name is Mason Carter. I'm 48 years old, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that snow doesn't care how expensive your house is. My wife Emily used to laugh whenever I said that because she knew exactly how obsessed I was with weather reports. Every morning, I'd pour coffee, open 3 different radar models, compare wind directions, moisture levels, and temperature shifts while she teased me that I trusted clouds more than television news. Maybe she was right. 8 years with the Army operating in mountain environments teaches you that weather isn't background noise. It's the boss. After leaving the service, I started a snow removal company outside Cedar Ridge, Colorado. Nothing glamorous, just me, 2 employees during the busy season, a heavy-duty plow truck I'd rebuilt myself, and enough contracts to keep food on the table. The subdivision where we lived wasn't even one of my customers because the HOA always hired the cheapest contractor they could find every winter. They never cared about quality. They cared about appearances. If flowers looked nice in summer and sidewalks looked clean in spring, everyone clapped themselves on the back. Winter? They assumed winter would somehow cooperate with their landscaping committee. The HOA president, though, was another story entirely. Her name was Denise Holloway, no relation despite the shared last name, and she loved control more than she loved common sense. She wasn't evil in the cartoon villain kind of way. She honestly believed that rules were more important than reality. If something didn't fit inside her binder of regulations, then as far as she was concerned, it shouldn't exist. We'd clashed before over ridiculous things. She once complained that my backup trailer was visible from the street for 4 hours while I was repairing a hydraulic hose. Another time, she sent me a violation because my driveway had bags of road salt stacked beside the garage in October. "It lowers property values," she wrote. I almost framed that letter because everyone living there secretly hoped I'd be the first person to clear their driveway whenever a storm hit. Funny how ugly equipment suddenly becomes beautiful when you're trapped inside your own house. 2 days before Christmas, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Every weather model lined up perfectly. Arctic air was dropping faster than expected, moisture from the west was increasing, and temperatures were going to crash immediately after sunset. That combination creates layered ice beneath fresh snow, the kind that's nearly impossible to remove once vehicles pack it down. I called one of my old Army buddies, Trevor, who now worked for the county road department. He answered with one sentence, "You seeing what I'm seeing?" I laughed because I knew exactly what he meant. "Yeah," I said, "this one's going to be ugly." "Worst one we've had in years," he replied. "We're already calling everyone in early." That conversation confirmed everything I already believed. I spent the rest of the afternoon checking hydraulic lines, fueling the truck, loading extra salt, testing emergency lights, and making sure every piece of equipment was ready. Emily walked outside carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate and leaned against the garage watching me work. "You're acting like you're getting deployed again," she joked. "Feels like it," I answered. "Somebody's gonna need this truck." She smiled. "Just don't let Denise see you polishing it. She'll probably write another violation." We both laughed. And that's exactly what happened the next morning. Around 10 o'clock, a white SUV rolled into my driveway. Denise stepped out wearing a spotless cream-colored winter coat with 2 compliance officers following behind her carrying clipboards like they were serving federal warrants. I already knew this wasn't going to end with Merry Christmas. She didn't even bother saying hello. She pointed at my truck and said, "We've received multiple complaints regarding commercial equipment being permanently displayed in a residential neighborhood." I looked around. "Displayed? Denise, I'm literally getting ready for a storm." She folded her arms. "The board voted last night. Commercial vehicles over the approved visual standard are prohibited unless stored off-site." I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. "You're making this decision 24 hours before the biggest storm of the season?" "According to the forecast," she replied with complete confidence. "We're expecting moderate snowfall." I shook my head slowly. "You really shouldn't trust those television forecasts." She smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they've already decided they're smarter than you. "Mr. Carter, Professionals adapt. Communities like ours don't need oversized machinery ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. I stared at her for several seconds before asking one simple question. So what exactly happens if I don't move it? She handed one clipboard to the compliance officer without breaking eye contact. Then we're authorizing immediate towing at the owner's expense, along with an $800 violation. I could have argued. I could have quoted county emergency guidelines. I could have explained exactly what 14 inches of wind-driven snow sitting on untreated pavement turns into after temperatures crash below zero. But something inside me said not to waste the words. Some lessons are expensive because people insist on buying them. So I stepped aside, watched the tow truck hook up the snowplow I'd spent years building, and quietly told Emily. They're about to discover the difference between snow and ice. Emily watched the tow truck disappear around the corner until the flashing amber lights vanished behind the pine trees. Then she looked at me with that expression only someone who has lived beside you for 20 years can give. Equal parts concern and curiosity. You're way too calm, she said quietly. That usually means somebody else is about to have a very bad day. I couldn't help smiling. Not because of me. I picked up my coffee from the porch railing, now barely warm, and stared at the sky. The clouds had changed in the last 30 minutes. They weren't fluffy Christmas postcard clouds anymore. They had flattened into heavy gray layers moving much faster than the average person would notice. The wind had shifted northwest. Tiny crystals drifted across the driveway long before the actual snowfall began. Most people think snow starts when they see flakes. It doesn't. Winter announces itself hours earlier if you know where to look. By noon, my phone started buzzing. One of my commercial clients asked if I could move them to the top of the emergency schedule. Another wanted extra salt delivered before sunset. Trevor texted me a picture from the county maintenance yard showing every snowplow lined up and fueled. His message simply read, "Good luck." I replied with one sentence. Mine sitting in an impound lot. 3 dots appeared almost immediately before his response came back. You're kidding. Wish I was. He called instead of texting. Mason, they actually towed your truck? Yep. Silence. Then a long sigh. Those people have no idea what they're about to do to themselves. No, I answered, watching the first real snowflakes begin falling. They really don't. Around 3 that afternoon, Denise sent an email to every resident. Somehow, one of my neighbors forwarded it to me. It proudly announced that the HOA had successfully enforced community standards before the holiday and assured everyone that weather conditions were expected to remain manageable. Reading those words almost made me laugh out loud. Manageable. That's what people say when they mistake hope for preparation. Emily leaned over my shoulder and read the message. She's doubling down. She has to, I replied. She's convinced she's right. By 4 o'clock, the snow became steady. By 5, it became heavy. By 6, visibility dropped so fast I couldn't see the mailbox from our front window. Wind slammed powder across the street in white waves, piling drifts against garages and retaining walls exactly where I'd predicted 24 hours earlier. The county had already closed 2 highways. Trevor texted again. Multiple accidents. Ice underneath everything. I simply nodded to myself. That's the part people never understand. Snow can be pushed. Ice has to be fought. Around 7, the first desperate calls started spreading through the neighborhood Facebook page. Someone couldn't back out of their driveway. Another family posted pictures of 2 SUVs stuck sideways near the entrance. Parents complained their college-age kids couldn't make it home for Christmas dinner. One woman wrote that her elderly father needed medication delivered but no vehicle could reach the house. Every 5 minutes another message appeared. Does anyone know when the HOA contractor is coming? Then another. We've been waiting 2 hours. Finally, somebody replied with the truth. The contractor had canceled because every available truck was already committed elsewhere before the storm even arrived. That's what happens during major winter events. You don't magically hire equipment after the roads disappear. You reserve it days in advance. I looked over at Emily. This is exactly why I kept warning them. She nodded without saying anything, and there wasn't anything left to say. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow blew horizontally beneath the streetlights while temperatures plunged exactly on schedule. Then came the real problem. Around 8:30, the snowfall briefly slowed just enough for the surface layer to compact under trapped vehicles before another burst of freezing moisture settled over everything. Invisible glaze ice, the kind that locks tires in place like concrete. I knew what was happening without stepping outside. Every minute that passed made recovery exponentially harder. At 9:15, my phone rang. Denise. I stared at the screen while it vibrated across the kitchen table. Emily raised an eyebrow. You going to answer? I let it ring twice more before picking up. Hello. Gone was the confident voice from the morning. She sounded exhausted, almost frightened. Mason, we have a serious situation. I imagine you do. Cars are stuck everywhere. Families can't leave. The contractor can't reach us. I waited. Finally, she asked the question she never thought she'd have to ask. Can you help us? I walked over to the window and looked outside at the snow piling against our porch steps. I'd love to, I answered honestly. My truck's been impounded. Silence. I could hear people talking frantically in the background. Someone yelled that another vehicle had slid into a mailbox. Denise lowered her voice. Please don't do this. Don't do what? I asked. People are depending on you. I closed my eyes for a second before replying. Yesterday, I was an eyesore. Today, I'm emergency infrastructure. That's a pretty fast promotion, she inhaled sharply. This isn't the time. Actually, I said calmly. This was exactly the time yesterday. Another long pause. Then she almost whispered, what do we need to do? Go get my truck. The impound yard is closed. Then find whoever has the keys. I hung up before she could answer. Emily looked at me carefully. You feel bad? I thought about the families trapped inside their homes. The kids waiting for grandparents who wouldn't arrive. The elderly residents hoping someone could make it through the storm. For them? Absolutely. For Denise, I shook my head. She made this decision believing consequences only happened to other people. About 45 minutes later, headlights swept across our living room. 3 vehicles stopped in front of the house. Denise climbed out first. Behind her stood the towing company owner carrying paperwork and another man driving my snowplow back onto my driveway. I stepped outside into knee-deep snow as the engine idled exactly where it had been that morning. Denise's expensive boots immediately sank into a drift. Funny how nature ignores job titles. She walked toward me holding an envelope. The violation has been canceled. I didn't take it. Good start. The towing fees are waived. Better, please, she said quietly, looking back toward the neighborhood where emergency lights flashed in the distance. People need you. I climbed into the truck, turned the key, and listened to the diesel engine rumble back to life. The familiar vibration almost felt like greeting an old friend. Then, I shut it off again. Denise looked confused. Why did you stop? I climbed back down carrying a clipboard from behind the seat. Because we're no longer talking about routine snow removal. I handed her several pages. We're talking about emergency ice recovery during an active holiday storm. She glanced at the first page and her face lost what little color remained. These prices reflect reality, I answered. You waited too long. She read aloud almost in disbelief. $1,500 for the main access road, $400 for each cul-de-sac, $300 per private driveway. She turned another page. An emergency deployment surcharge? Because every commercial contract I had tonight had to be postponed. Her voice grew tense. This is outrageous. I looked directly into her eyes. No. Towing the only properly equipped snowplow before the biggest blizzard in years was outrageous. This is simply expensive. She stood there silently while snow collected across the shoulders of her coat. Finally, she asked, if I sign this, you'll clear the roads? Not quite. I pulled out one final document. There's one more agreement. Her expression hardened again. What now? Every existing violation against my equipment disappears permanently. The HOA reimburses every dollar connected to today's towing. My truck receives a permanent exemption from appearance regulations. The board signs a 5-year priority snow removal contract with my company. And I paused just long enough for her to realize there was one last condition. Every resident receives a written apology explaining why their Christmas Eve turned into this disaster. She stared at me while the wind howled between the houses. Somewhere deeper inside the subdivision, another car horn blared continuously, probably someone hopelessly stuck on solid ice. Denise looked back toward the neighborhood, then down at the contract in her hands. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw something completely unfamiliar on her face. Not anger, not arrogance, regret. Denise stood there for what felt like an entire minute while snow gathered on the contract in her hands, the ink slowly disappearing beneath tiny white flakes, and I could practically see the argument happening inside her head, pride on one side, reality on the other. Finally, she looked toward the entrance of the subdivision where red and blue emergency lights reflected across the snow-covered houses, then back at me. If I don't sign this, she asked quietly. I answer with complete honesty. Then you'll keep waiting for a contractor who isn't coming tonight. She lowered her head, signed every page without another word, and handed the clipboard back. Please, she whispered, just help them. I nodded once, climbed into the truck, and this time I didn't shut the engine off. The diesel roared to life. Hydraulic pumps came alive. The plow dropped onto the pavement with that familiar metallic thud I'd heard thousands of times before, and I eased toward the entrance while Denise stepped aside. The first pass barely scratched the surface because I wasn't pushing loose snow anymore. I was breaking through layers of compacted ice hidden underneath. Every intersection required salt. Every curve demanded patience. And every cul-de-sac looked like a parking lot full of frozen statues instead of cars. People began opening their front doors the moment they heard the engine. Some waved from porches wrapped in blankets. Others actually applauded as the road slowly reappeared beneath the blade. One little boy ran into his front yard wearing oversized boots and yelled, "Mom, the snow truck guy came." That made me laugh harder than anything else that night because to him, I wasn't some contractor or neighbor fighting with the HOA. I was simply the guy making Christmas work again. Emily rode with me after midnight, helping coordinate which streets still needed salt, while Trevor sent updates from the county roads over the radio. We worked until almost 4 in the morning before the subdivision was finally passable again. Exhausted families cautiously backed out of driveways. Nurses made it to overnight hospital shifts. Grandparents finally reached waiting grandchildren for very late Christmas celebrations. And an ambulance that had been forced to stage outside the neighborhood earlier was finally able to drive directly to a resident needing medical attention. Watching those headlights move safely across clean pavement reminded me why I'd chosen this career in the first place. It was never really about moving snow. It was about giving people one less thing to fear when nature reminded everyone who was actually in charge. 2 days later, the real storm wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the HOA clubhouse. Residents packed the emergency board meeting until people were standing against the walls. They weren't angry because it snowed. Everyone understood storms happen. They were furious because preventable arrogance had turned an ordinary blizzard into a neighborhood disaster. One by one, homeowners stood up and told their stories. A young couple missed their baby's first Christmas with grandparents. An elderly veteran spent 6 extra hours waiting for prescription medication. A family visiting from Arizona ended up abandoning their rental car at the subdivision entrance and dragging luggage through knee-deep snow. Every story pointed back to the same decision: removing the only properly equipped snowplow before the storm. Denise tried explaining that she had been enforcing community standards, but even members who had supported her before refused to defend what had happened. Within 72 hours, residents organized a recall vote. She lost by an overwhelming margin. The compliance manager who issued the towing order resigned before disciplinary proceedings even finished, and the newly elected board invited me to their first meeting. Honestly, I expected another argument. Instead, the new president walked over carrying a small wooden plaque. "We owe you an apology," he said in front of everyone. "Not because you eventually helped us, but because we forgot the difference between appearance and value." They unanimously approved permanent protection for emergency service equipment, exempted my truck from every appearance restriction, signed the 5-year snow management contract exactly as agreed, and even asked me to help rewrite their winter emergency procedures so no future board could repeat the same mistake. A week later, I drove past the subdivision entrance and noticed something that made me smile. My truck was parked in my driveway exactly where it had always been, except now nobody looked at it with annoyance. Kids pointed at it with excitement. Neighbors waved as they drove past, and one gentleman actually stopped to tell me, "Funny, I never realized the nicest looking thing in this neighborhood was the ugly truck we almost got rid of." I laughed all the way back into the garage because he wasn't really talking about the truck. He was talking about perspective. Sometimes the things that don't fit neatly into a community's picture of perfection are the very things holding that community together when life gets difficult. Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether I should have simply forgiven Denise the moment she called. Maybe they're right. Maybe Christmas Eve wasn't the time to teach lessons. Or maybe accountability matters most when the consequences are real, because had I quietly accepted what happened, another board somewhere else would probably make the exact same mistake. I honestly still don't know the perfect answer. What I do know is this: snow eventually melts. Ice eventually breaks. But arrogance has a way of lasting forever unless somebody is willing to confront it. So now I'd like to hear what you think. If you had been standing in my boots that Christmas Eve, would you have started the truck the moment the HOA called? Or would you have required them to undo the damage they caused before lifting a finger? Was what I did justice, business, or simply revenge wrapped in common sense? Let me know down in the comments because I've read thousands of opinions about this story over the years, and people are still divided. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes common sense should always come before unnecessary rules. Until next time, stay safe, take care of each other, and never underestimate a snowplow just because it isn't pretty.